Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport and right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. Hello there, Space Monkeys. Welcome back to another episode of the Eternal Cycling in Alignment podcast. I recorded this episode the first time in 2025 at the very end, and I thought we might squeak it out before the new year, but it was not meant to be. The first round, I made an effort to record this, and it was really cold out, and I think that ended up influencing my recording a little bit in ways that I wasn't happy with. Also, I just didn't quite get the ideas across that I was hoping to convey. So here we are with a newly refreshed pile of notes that I can reference as I'm walking through Boulder on a warmer night and under a full moon. The moon is officially full at about 1 a.m. this morning, and I definitely feel the energy of the full moon. I don't know if you do, but it is a thing I am unquestionably aware of. It can heavily influence my sleep patterns, not always in a positive way. Last night, I would say my sleep was far less than optimal. But so be it. This is how things go sometimes. Tonight, I will take measures to attempt to optimize sleep and return to a state of restfulness. It is a beautiful night, however, and the stars are twinkling, the moon is shining, and the LED streetlights are beaming. So, pretty good night for a night mountain bike ride, actually, if I were so inclined. But instead, I'm going to do a walking podcast and spend some time talking to it on microphone to you. So I'll start this pod off with a story about how the power went out before Christmas in Boulder, Colorado. We were down for about 5 days in total. We had a break in the middle, so it was about 2 days and change, and then about a day with power, and then another 2 days and change. And this was a pretty stressful event for a few reasons. Having no electricity is obviously disruptive to your normal daily rhythm, especially when you do a lot of work using the internet. And at our house, we get fuck all for a cell phone signal. So I can't really patch into a cell phone and keep my laptop rolling. I had to go up to the office to do that. Even there, the cell signal isn't great. And my office is sufficiently close to my house to where most of the time when I was out of power, the office didn't have power, although there were a few moments where that was not the case. And when you spend much of your professional life on the internet, as many of us do now, and there's no power, you can sort of feel the background piles of emails accumulating in your subconscious. And this tends to raise the baseline levels of a sense that there are things that you need to be attentive to, but you can't. That's a little bit jarring or wearing after a while. Kind of erodes on your energy levels. But the bigger thing was we have a second freezer in the basement, and while it did in the end manage to stay mostly cold, I do have quite a stash of meat in there. I've got quite a bit of grass-fed steak and bison and salmon and halibut and all sorts of other goodies. And if that thing thawed out, it would have been pretty expensive mess. So I didn't want that to happen. So that meant that ice became the most valuable substance on the planet for a few days in Boulder, because everybody was thinking the same thing and trying to keep their fridges cool, their freezers frozen. Which meant I was constantly getting in the car and trying to time ice deliveries at local gas stations and grocery stores. Not constantly, but there were several rounds of this, in combination with sourcing candles and headlamps and bike lights and whatever else we had. We have a few LED-powered lanterns, and I was taking those to the office and charging them when we had power, etc. And so that all amounts to a lot of reactive energy. It amounts to a lot of management of new variables, and this adds stress to your world. And I was clever enough to keep my one bike out of the garage when the power outage was coming. So we had advance warning because of the windstorms. Public Service said they were going to shut down the power in advance. And this is because of the Marshall fires a few years ago, in which over 1,000 people lost their homes in minutes. It was one of the most insane things I've ever seen. It looked like people were using flamethrowers to cross fields because of how high the winds were and how the fire was spreading so quickly. It was nuts. And so preventatively now, Public Service, or really it's called Xcel Energy, they're shutting off our power in advance. And to their credit, they had multiple crews out the days before the storm was coming in anticipation of this event, and they were inspecting transformers and power lines and trimming trees away that might be dangerous, that they could see might cause problems. And so that was the thing. And then the first day the storm came, and sure enough, we had 80-mile-an-hour winds, easily a few gusts. I'm sure we're over 80. I bet there were a couple that were at 100. I don't know. I didn't look at the totals, the meteorological data, but it was a real windstorm for sure. And there was crap all over the neighborhood, and signs and garbage and everything else. It was a mess. And tree branches and fences everywhere, including our fence, got torn down. Although our backyard fence already had a huge hole in it anyway from when a bear ran through it a few weeks prior. So we were already on the sign-up list to have our fence repaired from that event. Yeah, in case you missed that or didn't believe me, yes, it's true. A bear ran through our fence. Maybe I'll include a picture of our bear hole in the Instagram post if you want to check that out. Only in Boulder, or all the other places they have bears. So this whole thing led to a heightened state of nervous system arousal. And I was riding my bike. As I mentioned, I kept my one bike out of the garage, which is good because our garage, of course, is powered by an electric garage door opener. Or, well, the door is, not the garage. And we have a side door, but it's got a shelf in front of it. It's not really accessible on purpose. And there's a small window in the back. And yeah, I could have forced some sort of entry into my own garage had I been inclined, but I didn't want to do that. So before the announcement, before the storm, I took a bike out and some shoes and a helmet and whatnot. Had that stored in the house. So I was doing a bit of riding. Nothing crazy, but just keeping the legs ticking over. Might as well go ride during the day if I'm not working. And catching up on reading and, counting our candle stockpile, or driving around looking for candles, or attempting to charge our devices off a USB solar-powered power bank, which didn't end up working, but was delivered amazingly fast by the Basotron 6000. This is the world we live in. So that was the experience. And on the one hand, it was quite nice because the neighborhoods were incredibly dark and incredibly quiet. Although at this moment right now, I got to say it's pretty freaking quiet too. And aside from the occasional sound of a generator that someone had going, there was not much happening. People just ate dinner by candlelight and presumably read books or played Monopoly or something. So a bit of maybe a reset there. And then Monday came. Rewind to Sunday. I think everything started on Wednesday, if I remember correctly. And on Sunday night, they kept saying the power was going to come on, and then they bumped it back, and they bumped it back, and then they bumped it to Monday. And to sort of add a crescendo to this whole 5 days of adventure and stress, that was the point at which I sort of went into overdrive. So to paint the picture a little more, we do have a gas fireplace. So the house was warm enough. We're sitting by that every night. And we have a gas stove. So we were able to cook some. And we balanced that out with ordering out. All the restaurants were nuked because everybody was in the same position. Nobody felt like cooking when you can't see too well. I managed to pull it off a fair amount. But without hot water, our hot water heater is on-demand electric. The dishes began to pile up, and you can kind of fake it with cold water for a round or two, and then it gets a little weird. So Sunday night, when I realized the power wasn't going to be on until sometimes Monday or perhaps later, because when they start bumping it back multiple times, you don't believe what they're saying, I just decided to go ham and boil a bunch of water, a couple rounds of water, and do all the dishes. And this took a couple hours. And it was, we'll say, a pretty focused state. And then I went to bed. And Monday morning, the power came on at, 5 or 6 in the morning or something like that. And that was a normal Monday for me, relatively speaking, because Mondays are days where I often have a lot of client meetings and write training for my athletes. And they're usually quite full these days. And so I jumped right into Monday and pretty much worked all day. It's quite common for me to have a 10-hour day on Monday. It's just the way it works out. I've tried to deflect that and try to offset that with work on other days of the week, of course, but Mondays still end up being quite full. And so Tuesday came. If I recall, I did a little strength in the morning, and then Tuesday afternoon, I just started to not feel so good. Started to feel just really tired and had a bit of a headache. Not too bad a one, but there was something there. And I just didn't feel great, didn't feel right. And I was sort of at the point where I was wondering, am I getting sick? What's going on here? Am I coming down with something? Did I push it too hard? And I think there are two types of illness in the world. This is me, Dr. Pierce, the virologist, speaking. That was sarcasm, by the way. And there's the kind of illness you collect from someone else. And then there's the kind of illness you have latently in your system. The kind of illness that exists in your body and creeps up and gets you when you're broken down or when you've done too much. And one is exogenous, and ostensibly it is driven by contact with other people who are not in perfect health. And it's also ostensibly driven by the duration or proximity of contact, right? So you could be super, super healthy, and if you go find someone who's got strep throat and lick the back of their throat for half an hour, then there's a good chance you're going to end up with strep, right? Like a very, very high probability, even if you're super, super healthy. Even if I'm really kind of talking about terrain theory versus germ theory. And I think my estimation is that there's some of both. And I'm self-aware enough to realize that I'm not an expert in this field, so I'll just call that out. But here's what I got. I think that's the play. That's the scorecard. You can get sick from exposure to other people, and this is the type of illness that comes from that type of experience. And you can also have an illness that just lives in you and comes up when you push too hard. And I think this is the one that we're concerned with both, and both are not ideal. But the one that comes up inside of yourself, this is a different type of circumstance that brings it about. It's a different type of psychology, or it's a different set of emergent characteristics that arise from the conditions of your life, your perceptions, your health practices, right? And so when we push too hard, or when circumstances dictate that we push ourselves really hard, maybe we're driven by certain things, or we make choices, ultimately, I would like to say we've always got a choice, right? Which is perhaps a bit naive or idealistic, but I think it can be said. And when we push too hard, sometimes we get sick. And I'm quite certain this has been the case for me on multiple occasions. And I think this because simply I observe this and I theorize that this is the case with me because I have exactly the same symptoms pretty much every time I get sick. It's like the same sensations, the same onset, the same duration, the same feeling of malaise, the same physical characteristics. And also it's within proximity of me going too deep for too long, right? It can either be an acute bout of I went too deep, such as when the power's out for 5 days and you're kind of running around like a little bit of a chicken with no head, and then you sort of push it at the end by kind of going into hyperdrive. I mean, my description of doing dishes for 2 hours probably doesn't sound like hyperdrive, but at that moment it was more about the emotional state of kind of like, a little bit of all hands on deck. I have to do this. Otherwise, we're going to wake up Monday and the kitchen's going to be like a war zone. And I got stuff to do. So I can't handle all that. I just kind of it was a little bit OCD mode is how I'll describe it. I definitely have that capacity. Hyperdrive. And so when I experienced this type of illness, as I mentioned, it's got this very specific list of characteristics. And it's evolved over years, but it's more or less been the same since I was a kid. And I'm pretty sure that the origin of this illness in a physical location lies in my sinuses. And I have managed to make great progress in moving the dial on that through various means. And I'm quite happy to say that of the 5 years I've been doing the Girona camp in Spain, this is the first year where I didn't get sick afterwards. And I will add that after this occasion of 5 days plus or minus of power outage, I also did not get sick. What I felt was, I thought I was going to get sick and I felt it coming, but it ended up just being about 3 days of really, really high levels of fatigue. Just like dead to the world, could barely move. Really wasn't capable of doing anything productive. And I respected that feeling. I just didn't do much. I just had very restful days. Went for a couple short walks, no bike riding, no strength. That would be inappropriate dose. And I would offer something that perhaps might be considered an odd statement, but when you're tired or when you're smashed, you should train at appropriate dose. And here's the twist. When you feel amazing and you feel like crushing the world, you should train at appropriate dose. The answer is always the same. You don't drop nuclear bombs in training. You can only set so many PRs in a year time. So set them on a race day, not in training. This is my suggestion. Now, some people will agree with this intellectually and then go set PRs in training anyway, because they just can't help it. or they're not quite conscious of how they're actually behaving in the world. I know many of these types of people. I myself have behaved this way, I'm sure. So what I'm saying is, I think it's useful to think about how much vital life force we are carrying. What is the measure of our vital life force, or our vital capacity at any given moment? This is the fundamental measure that we have to be in touch with. This is how we think about yin and yang. It's pretty much the balance of every living organism. And if we deplete ourselves too much, then we won't be effective at what we're trying to do. And if we deplete ourselves long term, then we put ourselves at risk for health crisis. So when we train with appropriate dose and we respect our vital life force, another way to say that is, don't wait for the tsunami of fatigue. So this is how I see what happened to me after the power outage. About 2 days later, I had a wave of fatigue that hit me. It wasn't a tsunami, but it was a wave. And I was able to maintain health and bounce back quickly because I recognized that wave and I didn't fight it. I didn't let my ego talk me into training, or my fearful belief systems or mindset convince me that I was going to lose some fitness, or not win a race next year, or get fat, or be slow, or suck on the next group ride, or suck on every single group ride all summer because I missed 2 or 3 days of training. I've been on the merry-go-round long enough to recognize that that's all just made up bullshit in my mind movies. And so I don't really have too many of those stories that go through my mind anymore, but I'm sure they're there on some level, and occasionally they still creep in here and there. And I'm smart enough to deflect those at this point. I mean, it's easy for me in some respects, to be fair, because I'm not a 23-year-old kid or a 19-year-old kid who's trying to win a pro contract, right? I'm not a 28-year-old who's trying to win another national championship or whatever experience I've been through in my life previously. I'm a 53-year-old dude who might do Steamboat next year and some other gravel races, and I got nothing to prove to anybody. So it doesn't really matter if I podium or not at these races, or win or don't. I'm there to have the experience and enjoy the community and the culture, and work with some of my athletes if there are athletes there. And then anything on top of that is just frosting on the cake. So when we respect this vitality that we all have, and we keep it in balance, then at our best moments, we have a reservoir from which we can work. We have a deep well we can reach into during the hardest moments of races. And that's when magic happens. That's when PRs happen. That's when we do things. And then after we cross the line, we reflect back on it and go, I don't know how I did that. That was insane. I went so hard for so long. Or I can't believe I stayed with that group. I've never stayed with that group of climbers that are that elite before, or whatever you accomplish. Or I can't believe I won that sprint. That's the magic that happens when you save the reservoir for the right moment. When we are overcooked, when we are a bit in the box, this is a time to respect the wisdom of the body. This is a time to really turn down the volume on the tsunami level events and turn up the volume on the subtle signals. This is so important. And this is something that I've witnessed in myself many times. It is the intentional deflection or rationalization or cognitive dissonance of signals that are perceived to be relatively subtle, right? In other words, you walk in the kitchen, your mother-in-law tells you, oh, you look a little tired today. And your bike racer, athlete, Superman ego says, or Superwoman ego says, I'm not tired. Tired is when I just climbed Mount Haleakala and I crossed the summit at 10,000 feet and I collapse in a pile of sweat, vomit, and blood. And my legs feel like they've just gotten ripped off by a pair of angry wolverines. No, I don't know what animal would rip your legs off in Hawaii. Wild boars, maybe? Anyway, wolverines are from Canada, dude. But yeah, and so you make this conversation in your mind. And then you look at her and smile and say, oh, I feel okay. Or thanks. Or I don't know, maybe make a smart ass comment if you're me. But this is all the ego playing with its little chest thumping about how tough you are because you're not a normal person who gets upset when they get caught in traffic. Actually, most bike racers are terrible at being in traffic because we're used to so much freedom on our bikes. But anyway, we're not a normal person who would break a sweat or gasp for air at the top of a staircase. How's that? Because we are elite athletes and we smash stuff and crush mountains and we are better than other people. Ooh, do we really think that? Do we really think we're better than other people because we dress ourselves in plastic stretchy pants and wear clicky shoes around coffee shops and then go ride 100 miles and we have posture like Mr. Burns? Is that what we think? Oof. I don't like that whole thought. Anyway, let's just move on. So, consulting notes. One of the things that gets us in trouble and gets us digging holes, both off the bike and on the bike, is this sense that the river is always running. And the river represents the pace of life and the idea that there is always more to do. And this is not untrue. There is always more to do. Really, the only things we can do in life are maintain, create, or destroy. And I think the frustration comes when people want to create more, but they get caught up in the maintain. And by the way, the older you get, the longer your maintain list gets. And the more stuff you own, the longer your maintain list gets. Unless you're some miraculous minimalist. But then your maintain list becomes maintaining minimalism. So, you're fucked any way you look at it. Pardon my French. But that's just the truth of life. It's just part of the human experience, that whole equation. But this raging river, well, one thing I'll say is you can never step in the same river twice. So part of human error is to assume that we can solve a new problem with an old technique. And that might work, but it also very well may not. And so, good for you if you want to try an old solution to a new problem. But every illness will be different and the circumstances of every illness will be different. So even though I just gave you a speech about how I've had the same sickness more or less since I was a kid, I have to approach every one as though it were novel. And use my instinct, listen to the wisdom of the body, and also honestly assess the situation. Really try to figure out what is happening. And then you can conclude what the best course of action is. And most of the time what that means is staying in bed when you're sick or when you're extremely tired and run down. The essence of the entire line of thought would be generally to slow down, to do a bit less. Now, I will fully admit this one is challenging for me because I am a person who has a lot on his to-do list. And I'm also a person who likes a good project. I've got a lot of creative ideas. I'm very Gemini. It's like kind of like being a hummingbird, kind of bouncing all over the place sometimes. And sometimes I can put quite a bit of energy into a somewhat novel idea in a very short time frame. And that, of course, expends energy. It can be depleting. Now, a truly creative project, especially when it comes to life, can also replete you. And it's this equation that balances yin and yang. It's the same equation that we have to consider when we think about training. Most people consider training to be depleting. It never even occurs to them that training could be repleting. That is, building energy back into the system. In Paul Chek's world, this is the difference between working out and working in. These are his terms. Additionally, some people may be aware of the difference between working in and working out, vaguely. But they may be under the belief system that the only thing that you can or should do when you're working out is to work out. That is to say, the whole point of exercise is to deplete you. And I would argue that is not the purpose of exercise. What is the purpose of exercise, you ask? Of course, it is to give you physiological load of a particular type. Typically, enough load to stimulate a response in the body. For the record, that is not the same thing as depleting. This is the essence of minimum effective dose exercise. This is the essence of, well, really being a professional. Because a professional athlete knows that on the start line of any given race, they have a limited number of bullets or KJs or anaerobic sauce or whatever you want to call it, magic dust, elixir. And they will use that very, very sparingly. In fact, they will do everything they can to avoid using that until the right moment. That's the whole game. That's just 101 on the start line of a real bike race. So, hopefully that's something to chew on. The last part of this podcast will be comprised of 3 readings. The first will be by Mike Salemi. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm reading Mike Salemi's material. The second will be Michael Holtz, read by me, and the third will be Evan Peikon. No, wait, I got those in the wrong order. Sorry. First is Salemi, second is Evan Peikon, and third is Michael Holt. And when I had this whole experience of frenzied power loss energy and post power loss fatigue wave, it really helped me glue some concepts together in my head about how I handle illness or downtime. In this case, I wouldn't call it illness. In this case, I would say, for me, it was just a wave of fatigue. And I got to give myself a pat on the back for not getting sick this time. I think that is a testament to me continually filling my well with a reserve of vital life force, and also really listening to the needs of my body and respecting the wisdom of my need to slow down and rest, not pushing through it. So, good job, Colby. Keep it up. Hopefully that's an inspiration to other people and for you to keep doing it in the future. And so these 3 different emails came across my desk sometime in the last couple of weeks. And all of them, it seems to me, tie into what we're talking about today, or what I'm talking about, which is this relationship of fatigue to workload and how to handle that. And in particular, Mike Salemi's email talks about what happens when we're constantly overdoing and bringing too much workload into our life, and the expense or the cost it has, rather, to the relationship with our family and loved ones. For me, it's a very potent read. Mike's a really smart guy. I have had Mike on my podcast. It was a long time ago. I'd have to go look in what episode it was. It was probably somewhere in the, I'm going to guess, 70s or 80s. So maybe 100 episodes ago. And Mike's doing really nice work right now. Really appreciating his writing. And he leads a men's group as well. And it is called, oh, now I'm going to butcher it. I think it's called The King Within. Might be wrong about that, but I will cite that when I read his email. That's a weird little beepy noise. Either that or a strange electronic bird. Here we're going to take our photo for the pod. Let's see if we can get a nice moonshot here. Oh, blammo. Look at that. Wow. That's like a frickin' moon of Jupiter right there. I don't know what's going on with that. Okay. See how that goes. The second email is Evan Peikon. And Evan is some sort of brilliant scientist. And he really understands a lot of things about physiology that are currently beyond my grasp. So that's cool. I've been reading his newsletters, and to be honest, some of them are just like Martian, and some of them are quite insightful. And this one in particular talks about wearables. So the reason I thought this was important is because Evan speaks very clearly about the limitations of wearable devices. And by wearable devices, and specifically, he refers to Whoop. And I think this is important because when we have a discussion about minimum effective dose or about trying to figure out when you're smashed, and in particular when we're talking about turning down the volume on the tsunami level signals and turning up the volume on the subtle signals of the body and really paying honest attention to those. I'm going to take one more photo of this moon. Wow, that's a pretty cool one. Okay, we're going to do one more because there's a couple power lines in this one. Evan talks about the limits of wearables and what it can tell you and what it really can't. And to be fair, I think that wearables have their place and they can have utility. There's no doubt about that. However, I think just like any technology, we don't want to become dependent upon them. We want to use them to fuel our intuition and understanding. And then there may be a point in your universe where you decide, I no longer need this wearable. This is not useful for me. And so Evan's point is that we need to be quite cautious about interpreting the data in these devices. And really what he's talking about is the difference between the data that is measured versus the data that is modeled. And his point is the data that is modeled isn't really so useful. The data that is measured may be. Now, I've mentioned this before on my pods, but for me, the three critical litmuses for any technology being adopted by anyone, in my opinion, are: one, it has to give you actionable data. It can't be something that takes 3 hours of calculations to extract some readiness number or some power number or some shit, or CDA. And there are devices on the market that take that much time. And it's just not practical. We can't use that. I can't even use that as a coach. My time is way too valuable to spend that much time on one number unless it was like the mother of all numbers, which we already know is 42 for the record. So I don't even need a device to tell me that. It's obviously the number that is the answer to the universe, life, and everything. Hello. And then the other thing about these devices is the data has to be, it has to tell me something that I don't already know about myself, right? I've got to learn from it. So if I purchase some cyclometer that tells me my foot size is 42 and a half or 43 or whatever, I already knew that. So It's gotta help me out with something that I don't know about myself. Like, for example, quantifying lactate. If we had a device that quantified live lactate, that could actually be useful. I know there are people working on these types of sensors. Maybe there's some already out there, probably. But this is something that could maybe be useful because it could teach us something about our bodies that then when we learn the numbers, that helps us have a greater conceptual understanding of what we're doing to ourselves when we ride a bike or when we sit on the couch. And then we're improving our relationship with our health. Right. So that's 2. I always used to have 3 of these things. What was the third? It's got to look cool. No. It's got to be super expensive. Yeah, probably. I don't know. We'll go with 2 for now. I can't remember what I used to say about the third one. But it definitely has to be actionable info. Maybe I said it had to be accurate and actionable. Maybe accurate was a separate one. Yeah, I think it was actually. Accurate information and then actionable, meaning it's got to be easy to use. It's got to be user friendly. Yeah, we'll go with those 3. So that's what Evan talks about, is the difference between those measured and modeled metrics. And so I read his email. And then the final one is Michael Holt, and he talks a bit about the depleted man and what kind of life consequences we have if we lead our lives as depleted people. And this is a powerful email, and his is quite long, so I don't read all of it to you, but I give you a lot of juice. So, and then I give you all the resources you need to go chase these people down if you want to learn more about them, because they're all quite sharp. Evan is definitely lost in the world of hyper reductionistic scientific thinking. He is of the opinion that you can find out all the answers of the universe if you just keep measuring and keep measuring. So I love studying people like him because I basically feel the opposite. But if I only just kept saying that and never learned from people who are trying to go the other way around the globe, then first of all, how the hell would I have any inkling that I'm right or wrong? And secondly, how boring would that be? That's what I have for this evening. I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you for listening to the first podcast of 2026. I do value my audience very much, and I really appreciate those of you who choose to contribute to the podcast. You can do this on my website, colbypierce.com, and just click around until you find a podcast page, and you can do a one-time donation or a monthly donation, and this definitely helps me because there are expenses incurred in this podcast. And while I do, of course, gain wellness from teaching and organizing my own thoughts into a microphone or with other people, having financial contributions helps offset my costs, and that is very much welcome and appreciated. That is how this podcast is funded. It's through donations by the audience and people like you. So thank you. And Happy New Year. Welcome in 2026. Well, it's a good time for reflection about 2025, and it's historically the time that we do things like make little promises to ourselves about how we're going to live differently, which are good things to do, generally speaking. Even better if you follow through with them. I think they're called New Year's resolutions, the last time I checked. Also, I would say let's respect the lunar cycle and the annual cycle. We are past the winter solstice, and it is now the time when days get longer. And hopefully we'll actually get some winter here in Colorado because we haven't had much. Our snowpack is extremely low. In any case, the only constant is change. You can never step into the same river twice. And as always, I encourage you to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. Be well. Appendix Item A. This is an email I received from Mike Salemi. It's not a personal email. It's an email he sent out on his email list. And it's definitely relevant to my line of thought and has influenced this episode. So I'm just going to read this email to you. If you want to learn more about Mike Salemi's programs, you can go to his website. That's mikesalemi.io, MikeSalemi.io. And he runs a program called The Grounded King. This is a series of men's retreats. His email reads, "Hi friends. Yesterday I turned 39. My wife Lauren gave me the best gift I could have wished for. 3 days alone in the woods. Time, space, solitude, nourishing food, and nature. I was in one of my favorite places, the Santa Cruz Mountains, with zero demand. People I told beforehand looked at me confused. Wait, you want to be alone? Yes, I did. I was craving something I hadn't fully given myself in a while. Freedom from demand. Time in wild nature, true solitude. I was regulated, but I wasn't resourced. There's a difference. I could function, show up, lead, coach. But I needed something deeper, not isolation, solitude. One disconnects you, the other reconnects you to yourself. Below are 5 essential masculine nutrients, the condition a man requires to stay grounded, open-hearted, and available. Not luxuries, regulation needs. When these are missing, we collapse inward. We withdraw, harden, numb out, distract. Number 1, freedom from demand. Time where no one needs anything from you. Number 2, time in nature. Wild, unconstructed nature where your nervous system entrains to something bigger. 3, solitude. Connected time with yourself, not isolated from yourself. 4, purposeful physical expression. Movement where your body can exert itself and move energy through. 5, brotherhood without fixing. Contact with other men where you don't need to have it all together or be a project to fix. I got 4 out of 5. Brotherhood didn't happen, but that's the nutrient I already prioritize plenty in my life. But the other 4, I was completely steeped in them. The yurt was perfect, small, simple, direct access to the woods. Lauren loaded me up with incredible food. I woke up before sunrise every day and did my practices outside, barefoot, watching fog move through the trees. I trained hard, stretched multiple times a day, moved my body with intention, did energetic work, breath work, felt everything that needed to be felt. I cried, I yelled, I released, I shed. And in the morning of my birthday itself, I sat for 4 unbroken hours of meditation, something I'd never done before. At home, my daily practice is 20 to 30 minutes so I can get right back to work or to family obligations, but to have time, to not rush stillness, that was invaluable. By hour 2, the mental noise quieted down. I stopped trying to do anything and just sat. What came through was clarity about my family and what actually matters. That's what happens when you stop rushing your practice. And here's what really landed for me. What I'll be carrying into 2026 as a non-negotiable practice. I aim to keep my family in my awareness energetically at all times. Too often, we as men disappear into our work for 8 to 10 hours, completely absorbed in what we're doing, and we don't even realize it. But our families feel it. Our women feel dropped when we're not energetically connected, even if we're physically present later. That's something I'll be practicing this year. Not just being present when I'm home, but staying tethered even when I'm working. Holding them in my field, feeling them, keeping that connection alive throughout the day. That's the work. And when I'm resourced like this, truly resourced, not just regulated, I can lead my family from the strongest place. Love them, guide them, protect them, lead them. Here's what I would invite you to do. Rate yourself on the 5 nutrients. Which one is most lacking right now? 1, freedom from demand. 2, time in nature. 3, solitude. 4, purposeful physical expression. 5, brotherhood without fixing. Be honest. Not what you think you should need, but what you're actually starving for. And here's the harder question. What excuses are you using to avoid claiming it? Too busy. Can't afford it. My family needs me. When things slow down. I get it. I've used all of these excuses. But here's the truth. When you don't resource yourself intentionally, you take it unconsciously. Through withdrawal, irritability, numbing, distraction. Your family feels that too. They just don't know what it is. So what would it take to prioritize the nutrient in the next 30 days? That nutrient in the next 30 days. Not someday, now. Because these aren't luxuries. They're what makes everything else possible. That would allow you to stay open-hearted instead of resentful, present instead of numb, grounded instead of reactive. I'm grateful my wife understands this. I'm grateful I gave myself permission to claim it. And I'm grateful to be 39, clear on what matters, and committed to the path ahead. Here's to a year of staying resourced. In service, Mike Salemi, men's coach, host of the King Within podcast. I thought that was an excellent email. It really boiled down 5 essential nutrients that I think every man does need. And for me personally, I felt, number 1, freedom from demand. That one's enormous for me because I'm blessed with a lot of clients, both in the coaching world and the fitting world. And it can be hard to find time where no one needs anything from me. Number 2, time in nature. He defines that as wild, unstructured nature where your nervous system entrains to something bigger. For us as cyclists, this can, of course, be a solo ride. But there's a difference again between being resourced and regulated. So I would ask you, as a cyclist, are you regulating yourself with long solo rides, or are you actually resourcing? How I would present that is, are you coming home from a long ride by yourself depleted and feeling like you can handle the demands of life, or are you coming back energized with increased vital life force? That's the difference. That's the defining characteristic of these types of rides that we want to critically think about. 3, solitude. Connected time with yourself, not isolated from yourself. In my case, I find that in most mornings, the house is quiet and I have it to myself. I have solo time. So I feel like that nutrient is pretty well filled. 4, purposeful physical expression. I also make time to do this through my movement practice, not just on the bike, but off the bike. And in particular for me, the practice of animal flow or primal movement has really filled that need, enriched that nutrient in my life. Mike defines that as movement where your body can exert itself and move energy through. Sometimes that can be on the bike for me, but cycling can't express all the energy that we need to move through. This comes down to the fact that movement in cycling is limited, and the body needs to express itself physically in multiple planes of movement under different loads. In cycling, while it has an entrancing or entraining effect, a métier or a meter, you might say, a rhythm, a cadence, that can be resourcing. At times, I think it tends to be regulating as well. It tends to let us numb out, distract, harden, as Mike says. The last one, brotherhood without fixing. This one can be challenging for me because often I look for that in rides, group rides, but I end up playing the role of the coach or the fitter. And I have to intentionally draw some boundaries around that and simply enjoy the experience of brotherhood without tapping into that zip code of my mental space or that hard drive of my RAM. Sometimes I'm asked to be a coach or asked bike fitter questions on group rides, and that's not the end of the world. And certainly if I have a 10-minute conversation with someone that helps them, I'm happy to do that. But often when I go on a group ride, I want to just have brotherhood without fixing. Of course, there are other ways to do that as well. Hopefully you find this message from Mr. Salemi as helpful as I did. And Appendix Item 1. Appendix Item 2. This is an email from Evan Peikon. You can find more of Evan's work on his website, On Human Performance by Evan Peikon, or actually I think this is a Substack page. Yeah, so it's onhumanperformance.substack.com, but if you search Evan Peikon, you'll find it. And his name is spelled EvanPeikon. This is issue number 59, Castles on Quicksand. I'm going to read you this email because I think it's relevant to our discussion, especially in regards to using biosensors to try to figure out how fucked we are. Issue number 59, Castles on Quicksand, a consumer health tracking story. This is Appendix Item 2. Last month, a friend showed me the Whoop app's latest feature with a level of enthusiasm typically reserved for winning the lottery. Look, he said, pointing to a number on his iPhone screen. My biological age is 3 years younger than my chronological age. Hearing my friend wax poetic about his Whoop age left me in an uncomfortable position. As someone who founded a wearable biosensor company and understands the limits of current sensing modalities, and actively works on developing new protein biomarkers, I had a strong inkling that his measurement was less than accurate, to put it kindly. After all, his Whoop wasn't measuring his telomere length, DNA methylation patterns, or protein aggregation markers. It was measuring his heart rate, HRV, blood oxygenation, skin temperature, and movement, and applying algorithms trained on population-level data to generate what appeared to be a legitimate biological assessment. This disconnect between the information Whoop claimed to provide and what their devices actually measures was surprising, to say the least. Surprisingly, to say the least, he says. That's sick. Despite my strong opinions about the validity of some of Whoop's digital biomarkers, I don't believe the company is malicious, nor do I think they intend to deceive consumers. What I do believe is they and other consumer health companies are operating in a hyper-competitive environment where the reward for sensational and easily marketable features is increased consumer adoption, and the penalty for conservative claims is irrelevance. In this environment, the question isn't whether any individual company will make unsubstantiated claims or market a feature their technology can't support. Instead, it's who will be the first to do it and how far they can stretch these limits until consumers lose faith in their technology. To fully appreciate why the current generation of consumer health devices represents such a profound case of measurement mismatch, we need to start with what we know about the human biology and health from a bottom-up perspective. Take anti-aging, the poster child for speculative consumer health claims. The past 2 decades of research propelled by next-generation sequencing have shown aging to be a complex, multi-system phenomenon involving cellular senescence, mitochondrial dysfunction, protein aggregation, genomic instability, and epigenetic drift, all of which are processes several layers of biological abstraction removed from anything a wrist-worn optical sensor can detect. The same principle applies to brain health and immune function, among other areas of health. The most meaningful biomarkers exist at the levels of gene expression, protein abundance, metabolite concentrations, and methylation patterns. Measuring these things accurately requires high-throughput RNA sequencing, mass spectrometry, immunoassays, imaging techniques, and other technologies. A device that measures heart rate, skin conductance, and movement patterns is an entirely different universe of biological information. This isn't to say that the physiological parameters measured by consumer devices are meaningless or lack utility. Heart rate variability does correlate with autonomic nervous system function. Sleep architecture does relate to metabolic health, and activity patterns do influence cardiovascular risk. But correlation is not causation, and correlation is certainly not equivalent to direct measurement. When devices measure heart rate variability and claim to be assessing recovery, or measure blood glucose and claim to measure metabolic health, their providers are making conceptual leaps over gaps that cannot be spanned by objective fact. Whoop's pace of aging score provides a perfect case study into how this measurement gap manifests itself in practice. Whoop as a company has positioned its product as a leading form-first wearable, and its devices genuinely excel at what their hardware is designed to do, namely heart rate and heart rate variability. The problems begin when accuracy with their primary sensing modality, photoplethysmography, I think I did that right, becomes the basis for claims that venture far beyond what the underlying hardware and sensors can support. The biological age and pace of aging measurements are the most egregious examples, but they are hardly unique. Consider what would actually be required to estimate biological age accurately. Morgan Levine and colleagues' DNA-M phenoage, one of the more sophisticated approaches to biological age prediction, incorporates chronological age, albumin, creatine, glucose, C-reactive protein, lymphocyte percentage, mean corpuscular volume, red cell distribution width, alkaline phosphatase, and white blood cell count in its model. Yet even this approach has its limitations. The biological aging is organ-specific. Your liver, brain, and cardiovascular system don't age in lockstep, and as a result, any single metric inevitably obscures important biological heterogeneity. Capturing this heterogeneity is possible, but it requires high throughput proteomics, measuring thousands of plasma proteins simultaneously, as is demonstrated in this seminal paper from the Corre lab at Stanford. So if you want to see the links and the graphs that Evan has in his email, you can sign up for his Substack. And I, by the way, am not subscribed to him behind a paywall. So this is all information that he offers for free. Whoop's approach, by contrast, relies on algorithms trained on population-level data to identify correlations between lifestyle factors and age-related outcomes. In their own words, Whoop age and pace of aging are designed to reflect well-established links between behavior, physiology, and long-term health. While Whoop age correlates with perceived health and general wellness at the population level, there is no clinical benchmark for validating these metrics. This approach might have some predictive value at the population level, but presenting it as a precise measurement of biological age feels a bit suspect. The tragedy is that Whoop's underlying, unadulterated measurements are valuable. They don't even require inflated claims to justify their use. So then why do they take this approach? The answer lies in what I call the single-point sensing trap. When you built your entire brand around the premise that a wrist-worn band can provide comprehensive health insights, as Whoop claims with their promise to improve performance, build healthier habits, extend lifespan with continuous health monitoring, you've painted yourself into a technological corner. To admit that holistic health monitoring might require multiple distributed sensing modalities would undermine what makes your product marketable in the first place. This constraint creates a perverse innovation cycle. Instead of expand their sensing capabilities, I think he meant to write expanding their sensing capabilities to match their ambitious claims, companies like Whoop are forced to stretch their existing sensor data even thinner, creating increasingly elaborate algorithmic castles built on quickstand. Each new feature, from sleep coaching to strain optimization to biological age estimation, represents another layer of abstraction designed to extract insights that their hardware just can't capture. Meanwhile, a schism is starting to open in the consumer health space between companies doubling down on single-point sensing like Whoop and those that are beginning to embrace a distributed sensor architecture, which I've previously written about in issue number 48, Distributed by Design. Aura's recent integration with Stello speaks on this, when Aura acknowledges that ring-based measurements needed to be complemented by continuous glucose data to provide meaningful metabolic insights. They're admitting something that should be obvious but remains unspoken. Key sentence here, people. Human biology is far too complex for any single sensing modality to capture. So I'm going to pause here and just comment on that. I think he's dead on here. As consumers, we have to recognize that human biology is too complex for any single sensing modality to capture, but we want to believe that we can wear a ring or a band and it can tell us everything about our health. And that's a technological fantasy. Okay, resuming text. The transition from single-point to multi-point sensing enables something more profound than just measurement diversity. It opens the door to discovering network biomarkers, a conceptual framework that treats biological relationships rather than isolated metrics, also a key sentence, as the fundamental unit of health assessment. So pausing again for a moment, we can also apply the same logic to all the data that we look at in our training software, whether that's Training Peaks or Golden Cheetah or WKO or whatever it is. The relationships between biological data are more important than the single data points themselves. This is frequently the case. Back to text. Consider what this might mean for the biological age measurement that so captivated my friend. Instead of trying to compress the complexity of multi-system aging into a single score derived from heart rate and sleep patterns, imagine a distributed sensor network that treats aging as what it actually is, a heterogeneous, organ-specific process with complex interdependencies. Such a system might integrate data from a smartwatch or Ring, continuous glucose monitor, muscle oximeter, smartphone sensors including the camera and microphone, and periodic laboratory biomarker panels. Rather than generating disparate data streams, these inputs would feed into models designed to map causal relationships and treat the network itself as the biomarker. That's an interesting idea. And Evan is clearly way steeped into the science of this. He's quite knowledgeable in this respect. It's his entire line of thought. And so I will humbly recognize that I'm even having trouble pronouncing some of the words in this email, which is an indicator of how far down that road he is and how far I am not. That said, it strikes me that what he's saying is if we assemble multiple data points, we can still come up with this biomarker, this causal relationship that treats the network itself as a biomarker. And I'm not sure if I believe that's possible. Also, I think that the complexity of that system would be potentially self-defeating. And so I would refer you to the practice of simply developing the introspective capacity to understand when you are fucked and staying in bed instead of going out and riding hard. That doesn't answer the question specifically of how old you are, but I also don't think that's necessarily a question we need to answer, which is a completely different topic. But I'm going to continue reading. Additionally, by collecting continuous digital biomarkers alongside periodic molecular measurements, we can map the causal relationship between different layers of biological organization, creating a fundamentally different paradigm for personalized health monitoring than what exists today. For example, we could build causal models that map how changes in your diet, exercise, and daily behaviors impact sleep quality, specific inflammatory markers, and digital biomarkers like HRV, and how these things in turn impact each other, mapping the various circular dependencies and chains of cause and effect. To me, this is just reaching deeper into my comment. This line of thought is reaching deeper into the quantification of science, trying to quantify more and more things in order to explain what is fundamentally an unpredictable system that has emergent properties that are by definition not predictable. If you want to learn more about this basic concept, just take a Google and look up the 3-body problem, and you'll get what I mean. In a complex system, this is synopsized by a single sentence. In a complex system with 3 bodies, there are enough variables to where over a long enough timeline, unpredictable results always happen, no matter how detailed your map is. That is nature. Okay. Resuming text. Additionally, by collecting continuous digital biomarkers alongside periodic... Wait, I just read that. Sorry, wrong paragraph. Next paragraph. The practical applications of this approach are many. Imagine you notice your heart rate variability declining over several weeks, coincident with changes in sleep architecture, more volatile blood glucose measurements following meals, and mild muscle tension dysphonia sensed via your iPhone's microphone. Traditional approaches might flag this as low readiness, high strain, or some other vague wellness claim. A network biomarkers approach, on the other hand, might recognize this pattern as a potential signal of infection or systemic inflammation and recommend targeted laboratory testing for specific inflammatory cytokines, such as TNF-alpha, IL-1, and IL-6, not only allowing for its predictions to be validated, but further feeding data into the causal models. Perhaps more importantly, by mapping causal chains between all of these variables and the relative strength of those causal relationships, we can determine the most impactful interventions, which is something I've written about in Breaking Biometric Babble. Interesting idea. I don't know if knowing the inflammatory cytokines such as TNF-alpha, et cetera, will actually give us any actionable items. Like, what are we going to do? Then you're going to take an antiviral? Perhaps. Is there such a thing? Perhaps. Continuing, this also seems to align with Aura's thinking, as indicated by Maz Brumond, their VP of product, who told CNET, by combining Stello data with Aura's existing insights, we are empowering members to better understand the cause and effect relationships between eating patterns, energy, mood, and recovery, and ultimately make sustainable, science-backed lifestyle changes. This sounds a lot like the 6 foundational principles to me. It sounds like we're going a really long, expensive, and data-intensive route to tell people to hydrate properly, eat nutrient-rich food, sleep properly, have good thinking patterns, have good relationship with movement, and have proper respiration patterns. A couple more paragraphs, then we're done. Seeing one of the biggest players in the industry embrace the aforementioned approach validates what should be clear: that the measurement gap that characterizes today's consumer health landscape isn't immutable. It is the predictable result of trying to extract complex biological insights from individual sensors measuring isolated parameters. However, as the industry shifts from single-point sensing to distributed sensing networks and network biomarkers, the door to genuine biological insights opens wide. Perhaps. Continuing, this transition will likely create a bifurcation in the market. Companies that continue building increasingly elaborate castles on quicksand, layering algorithmic complexity onto fundamentally inadequate sensing, will find their structures collapsing under their own weight as consumers become more sophisticated about what these devices can and cannot measure. My note, I think that Evan is optimistically giving consumers a lot of credit, and I don't mean that to be insulting to anyone. I just think that's the reality. Meanwhile, those embracing distributed sensing will capture the growing segment of users who want real, actionable health insights. The question isn't whether this shift will happen, but how quickly the industry will recognize that solid ground lies not in more clever algorithms, but in acknowledging the inherent complexity of human biology and building sensing architectures that match that complexity. That's the end of Evan's email. Again, you can find that. You can subscribe to his email on his Substack, which is onhumanperformance.substack.com. You can also search his name, Evan Peikon. That's EvanPeikon. So, very interesting email. And I do agree. I think that Whoop is making some leaps with their algorithmic data. And this concerns me a bit. I have seen this in some of my own devices. I have a scale that measures body fat, amongst other things. And the data that it extracts from that list of very simple measurements and metrics is pretty extensive. And a lot of it you can see is just sort of crafted off of algorithms. So you have to wonder, how useful is it? Just for me standing on a scale and using bioimpedance, they're extracting all kinds of data about my bone density, my hydration levels, my body fat. It gives you like 20 metrics. But the reality is the body fat is off by probably 5% to begin with. So clearly, whatever my body composition is throws their generic metrics for a bit of a curveball. Why would that be? I have no idea. Probably because my lifestyle and my health practices don't match the bell curve of what their user base does. Whatever that means. That is the end of Appendix Item 2. Appendix Item 3. This is also an email from Michael Holt, who's been a guest on my podcast on 2 occasions. Michael is a meditation teacher and a martial arts instructor. And he has a program called Savage and Saint. You can find him by searching Savage and Saint, just like it sounds. And you can subscribe to his email list, which I definitely recommend. I think his emails have always been really good, but in the last month, he's just been crushing it, writing things that really get straight to the core of men's issues and are really thought-provoking and have a lot of useful content. Michael also leads men's retreats, one of which I've attended several years ago, and I found it to be extremely beneficial. So kudos to Michael for the work he's been doing. So this email I received December 23rd of this year, and this is appendix item number 3. There's a question worth sitting with. What percentage of men do you encounter on a daily basis who seem genuinely alive? Not functional, not busy, not managing. Alive, embodied, vital, fully switched on. Present in their bodies, clear in their direction, capable of meeting the moment without fragmentation. Operating from a baseline of sustainable power rather than perpetual depletion. If you're honest, the number is staggeringly low. Can you even think of one? Most men you encounter are walking through life in a state of barely managed exhaustion, going through the motions, doing what's expected, holding it together just enough to keep the machinery running. But barely holding on is not the same as thriving, and the cost of this collective depletion is far greater than most people realize, because when men are depleted, everyone suffers. The illusion of isolated impact. There is a seductive myth embedded in modern individualism that your personal state is your own business, that how you manage your body, your mind, your energy is a private matter that affects only you. This is completely false. Your vitality, or lack thereof, ripples outwards in ways you can't always see but are always present. The depleted man. The depleted man cannot show up for his partner with the presence and capacity she needs. His exhaustion makes him unavailable, as he comes to view her ebbs and flows as another annoyance he must manage. His fragmentation makes intimacy impossible. His baseline irritability creates an atmosphere of walking on eggshells. Cannot model strength and grounded presence for his children. This is the depleted man continued. The depleted man cannot model strength and grounded presence for his children. They learn to navigate the world through his nervous system. If his baseline is anxiety, reactivity, and chronic stress, that's the operating system they inherit. His irritable criticisms become their inner voice. The depleted man cannot contribute meaningfully to his work, his community, his purpose. He's in survival mode, just trying to get through the day. The creative capacity required for genuine contribution is offline because all available resources are allocated to crisis management. Cannot protect what matters, not because he lacks the will, but because he lacks the energy. Depletion makes you vulnerable, predictable, easy to manipulate. When you're running on fumes, you can't defend your boundaries, your values, or your people. The vital man is the opposite of all this. And this is why vitality is not a luxury. It's not a self-indulgent optimization. It's not personal preference. It's a moral responsibility. So I'm pausing here to just comment. I think that's a really interesting line of thought he has there. And I think it's dead true. Especially in cycling. Cycling is a sport often comprised of people who see themselves as solo warriors. And there's a tension in bike racing because, as Jonathan Vaughters once famously said, cycling is a team sport where an individual wins. But the individual act of cycling, it's a highly personalized and solipsistic form of sport and activity. And so it reinforces that mentality of walking the world alone or riding across the mountains alone, conquering the mountain alone, right? And this is how we even glorify or deify the finest performances in races. What is the archetype of the ultimate bike racer? Someone who wins solo, right? You conquered everything on your own. You were the fastest across the line because you ripped everyone off your wheel with your relentless pace and your endless drive. So a lot of these same beliefs are rooted in this modern interpretation of manhood, and it's selfish. It disregards really what is the true calling of man, which is to defend space and manage his kingdom. If you're going to be a true king, you have to manage your empire, and managing your empire means caring for the people in your family and your friends and your coworkers, your colleagues. The function of the masculine, returning to the email. For the vast majority of human history, the role of men was clear: protect, provide, create order from chaos, stand between danger and those who cannot defend themselves, build the structures that allow life to flourish. These functions haven't disappeared. They've just become abstracted. The threats are different, the methods are different, but the fundamental role remains: to be a stabilizing force, a source of strength, the container of power that can be directed toward protection and creation. But this function requires fuel. You cannot protect when you're depleted. You cannot provide when you are fragmented. You cannot create order when your internal world is chaos. You cannot be a source of strength when you're running on contempt and caffeine. The masculine function in its highest expression is generative. That's a key sentence. It creates conditions for others to thrive. It holds space, bears weight, and transforms chaos into structure. Depletion inverts this. The depleted man doesn't generate. He extracts. He takes energies from those around him because he has none of his own. His presence becomes a drain rather than a fountain. This is not a moral failure. It's a mechanical reality. When your tank is empty, you pull from others' tanks. So I'm going to pause here. Well, I'll read the last sentence. Usually unconsciously and always from the people closest to you, and the cycle perpetuates. So pause to comment. I think that is strikingly true. I know men who seem to always pull from other tanks. And Alex Howes recently said in a phone call that we did, a coaching meeting on Team EF Coaching, I wrote this down because it was so poignant. My sponge only has so many capillaries. And this is when we were discussing clients who never seem to have their shit together and are kind of always floundering around. These are depleted men. These are men who are not managing their empires and not managing their energy. Returning to Michael's email. Factory farmed men. In the thought exercise at the outset of this email, you likely failed to call to mind a long list of men who you experience as fully alive, operating consistently at optimal capacity across many domains. You likely failed to even think of one. This is because modern culture is not designed to produce vital men. It is designed to produce compliant, depleted, manageable men, factory farmed, optimized for a very narrow kind of output, kept just alive enough to participate in the systems that extract value from them. This is not a conspiracy. It's an emergent property of systems optimized for short-term extraction rather than long-term cultivation. That is also an extremely insightful sentence. I'm going to read it again. This is not a conspiracy. It's an emergent property of systems optimized for short-term extraction rather than long-term cultivation. So, my comment. This is what you must do. You must engineer your life intentionally, with boundaries, and with structure to cultivate long-term vital life force for yourself. This is the purpose of life in men, to be generative. Returning to Michael's email. Consider the default modern masculine trajectory, conditioned from childhood to suppress emotion, override physical signals, and derive worth from external validation. Check, check, and check. That's my comment. Educated in systems that reward compliance and punish free thinking. Launched into careers that demand constant availability, chronic stress, and the subordination of personal needs to institutional demands. Encouraged to regulate the resulting depletion with consumption, distraction, and numbing behaviors that provide temporary relief while deepening the underlying dysfunction. Offered pharmaceutical interventions for the inevitable symptoms of living contrary to their nature while the root causes remained unexamined. Told that if the system isn't working for them, they're the problem. Lack of discipline, lack of resilience, lack of toughness. By the time most men hit 35, they're chronically depleted, increasingly disconnected from their bodies, unclear about their purpose, and running on an unsustainable operating system. And they think this is normal because everyone around them is in the same state. But in this culture, normal is not natural. It's insane. Agreed on all points, Michael. What vitality actually means. Strip away all the vague wellness language, and the vitality has a specific definition. Vitality is the state that emerges when both your fundamental creative assets are operating at elevated capacity simultaneously. These two assets are energy and concentration. Energy is your fuel, your life force, the raw power available to you. My comment, this is what I refer to as vital life force. Concentration is your direction, your ability to focus that power with precision toward intention. I obviously resonate with this message because my whole fucking podcast is called Cycling in Alignment. When both are low, you're in survival mode, reactive, fragmented, just trying to get through. When energy is high but concentration is scattered, you have manic intensity but no coherent direction. Lots of motion, little progress. This is burnout disguised as productivity. When concentration is sharp but energy is depleted, you have clarity without capacity. You can see what needs to be done but lack the horsepower to do it. When both are elevated simultaneously, you enter a state characterized by sustainable creative power, vibrant physical well-being, direct intuitive clarity, the capacity to meet high demands without depletion, recovery, oscillation that most men are trapped in. This is vitality. And it's not a feeling, it's a state. And it can become the baseline from which you operate. Michael's email goes on. It's quite long from here, so I'm not going to read all of it. I will let you explore the rest of it. But he clearly has really accurately laid out what it means to be a man with purpose and intent and vital life force, and given us some of the basic parameters in which we might screw that up and some of the consequences for screwing that up. And I think this applies to potentially most or maybe all men that we know that are close to us on some level. So I would ask you, how many men can you name who seem genuinely alive, who have high vital life force? This is health practice. To be in alignment with your purpose as a generative male. I hope you found that email interesting. Again, you can learn more about Michael at savageandsaint.com. And again, that's Michael Holt. Holt is his last name. Michael has some excellent teaching. So if any of those emails in Appendix 1, 2, or 3 were interesting to you, I encourage you to go forth and explore more. All these gentlemen have good emails you can sign up to and learn more about. And I hope you found that helpful and relevant to our discussion. Thank you for listening. End Appendix Item 3. Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together. including a short or outdoor ride. I will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of cycling and alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.